This is episode 53 with Hanna Bier.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 53 today, and I'm very excited to be speaking to none other than Hanna Bier. Now, before we get started, you'll probably notice my voice is a bit hoarser than normal, but that's another story you can check out on my Instagram stories. You can follow, you'll find out about that. But we have a very cool interview lined up today, and it's with Hanna Bier, as I mentioned. And just a few years ago, Hanna was living in Bali on her way to graduating from college with a degree in international fashion management. But while her life looked amazing on the outside, inside she was barely hanging on. Throughout her life, Hanna struggled with mental illnesses like PTSD, anxiety, depression, as well as an eating disorder, and she even considered taking her own life. Facing a tough decision, she knew that there was no way she could take care of her emotional needs, fulfill her dreams, and grow into the person she was capable of becoming while working in her corporate job. By developing a spiritual practice, Hanna was able to release her anxiety, heal her trauma, and build a thriving business where she now helps other creative women do the same thing. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn the thing most people don't understand about suicide. Can you really become a life coach at 22? What it really means to be spiritual, accepting things as they are versus fighting for what we want, how to put yourself in a meditative state to receive powerful visions, and how to discover the work you are meant to create. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/053. But for now, let's go hang out with Hanna. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm speaking to Hanna Bier. Hanna, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Hey, Brian. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get you on the show and to speak about the topic that we're going to dive into today. And you reached out to me with this sort of topic suggestion, which we'll talk about in a second. But for the people who are listening and don't know what it is you're all about, why don't you tell us about that and a bit about your quarter life story?
Yeah, I somehow stumbled on your podcast and I really loved it, and I just wanted to reach out and to connect with you because I really feel strongly for what you do and for what you stand for, and that I help people really discover their life's work and really discover what they want to do in the world. And so I feel like that's oftentimes a question that we ask ourselves when we are in, around our quarter life crisis, or, after we graduate from college or start our first jobs. Like, that's oftentimes a question, like, what do I even want to do with my life? What's my life's work? What does success mean for me? Oftentimes we've tried some things, like we've tried a bunch of jobs, or we've tried to build a business already, or we have no idea at all about what we want to do, and it can be very disorienting. And so many of my clients come to me, and they come to me with like a business idea, or they come to me feeling totally burned out because their jobs don't work for them anymore, or they come to me because they feel like they have no idea what they should even do in the world. And I see this all around me, and so it's really my life's work to help people find their own soul's path. So not following what they think they should be doing or what they think is going to make them look successful or impress the people in their lives, but really the path that is perfect for them, living the life that makes them feel successful, that makes them feel in alignment with what works for them and how they want to live. And for some people, this looks like building their own business. For many people, it looks like really using their gifts and their talents to build a business that does some good in the world. And so some of my clients are photographers, creatives, designers, some of them build juice companies, but also some of them are returning to corporate jobs because that's actually the thing that supports them best in the phase of life that they're in. So I got so passionate about this topic because, first of all, people started coming to me for this because they perceived me as living this life. I started my business at the age of 22. I graduated from fashion school. Before that, I have a bachelor's of science in fashion management. And so whilst in college, I felt like I wanted to do something meaningful. Like I wanted to use my time to really do some good. And so I became a life coach and I started my own business at a pretty young age. And I made some pretty big moves. Like I lived in Bali and then I lived in Germany and now I'm living in Amsterdam. And my business was profitable right from the start. And that's something that many people saw and they thought, well, I want to do something as outrageous. Like I want to be fierce enough to really follow what I want, no matter what anybody else is doing. And it does take guts to do that. And looking back, I just sometimes shake my head in disbelief, thinking, whoa, I had balls. And so now people are coming to me because they want support in creating their own life based on their version of success.
Yeah, it sounds like we're a couple of soul siblings on the other end of the world. Yeah, so I love that. There's so many directions I could go in with that, but I want to sort of rewind to your own upbringing and your teenage years. And you struggled with some personal challenges yourself, anxiety and eating disorders, and even suicide attempts. Could you maybe talk us through that, if that's okay with you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. My upbringing was very, very, very challenging. I felt very isolated because I grew up in a family where I kind of felt like an orphan, like I never really had a lot of connection to other family members. I felt very isolated. Early on, I developed an anxiety disorder, and I also had a bunch of traumatic experiences ranging from physical abuse to rape and other things. And I had a serious case of PTSD. And so at the age of 14, I started working with a therapist who basically cheered me on to keep going and to keep to stay in school, to finish, school and all that kind of stuff. But I was really, really struggling. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to live because the experiences that I had as a little girl were so traumatic that my body really just couldn't cope with it. So I developed an eating disorder, not out of the thought that I was somehow, fat or ugly or whatever, which is something that many people tend to assume. But for me, my eating disorder really started because I did not know how to cope with my trauma. I did not know how to live. I did not know how to form relationships, how to be focused, how to live well, and how to make up for all the things that I needed but never got from my family, like consistency, love, structure, all that good stuff. I never had it. And so I had to really learn from scratch how to create a life that would give me all those things, since nothing was really handed to me on a silver platter. And my eating disorder was a coping mechanism to really distract me from the pain that I was in throughout my teenage years. So I look at the PTSD and the anxiety disorder and the suicide attempts as the real pain. And then my eating disorder was the first attempt to get some structure, to get some forward momentum, to somehow get away from my pain. It obviously didn't work, but that was kind of where it started. And that was what brought me to therapy and to somebody who could help me with that, because I really didn't know.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. It's hard for me to relate because I didn't grow up in circumstances like that. But for people listening, like, what is something that the average person doesn't understand or know about suicide?
Something that I wish more people knew was that people don't attempt to end their lives when they're hitting rock bottom. Like that's oftentimes people think, oh, when you're suicidal, you've hit rock bottom, which is actually not the case. When you're rock bottom, your nervous system and your body just completely dissociates. You're basically numb and not living at all, like total, you're just so weak and drained of energy that you can't even get yourself to end your life. It's actually really, really hard. It takes a lot of energy to actually go through with it. Like I've tried I have friends who have tried, and we all say it's really, really difficult to do it when you're so broken. And so something that I wish more people knew was that oftentimes when people start healing their trauma is when they get the clarity to choose. So I thought to myself many times throughout my life, like, do I want to end this? And that was never when I was really at the bottom. That was when I started feeling better, regaining some energy. And from that point, I could really think, like, does this even make sense? Like, what's the purpose of my life? Do I want to end this, or do I want to make the decision to try and live as hard as it might be for me?
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you weren't successful in your attempts and that you've really bounced back to where you are now. And speaking of bouncing back, if people are going through a similar sort of trauma, what's your advice for people in that situation? How did you bounce back, and what would you tell others?
That's a good question. What helped me the most was trusting my instincts. And oftentimes the reason why trauma gets so stuck and doesn't get released is because we don't let the trauma flow. We don't let the terror flow, the rage, the anxiety, and it somehow gets stuck. So there is no movement in those very intense emotions anymore. And growing up, I always had the instinct to run, to just be by myself, to be in the woods. I always had the instinct to shake. Like when I had an anxiety attack, like I would beat my body against the wall, and that was because I was like unconscious within the anxiety attack, but also it was my body like trying to shake. And that's also something that animals do. When animals experience trauma, they shake, or when they jerk back to life after having been hit by a car or something like this, their bodies very intensely shake. And so those are their instincts taking over. Bodies know how to heal themselves, and psyches know how to heal themselves. The only thing that we really need is to follow that. Like if you're angry, channel that anger. If you feel trauma or, this frozen fear, there is some good in that. And so use that intensity and that frozen fear. And it's not easy to do it, so it would definitely be helpful to get help from a therapist, a coach, or somebody who knows about emotional healing so that they can guide you through these things. But if you have very strong instincts that tell you to do something, trust them. Running away from your problems, like, it's oftentimes that we frown upon that, or we think, oh, that's not helpful, whatever. But if your instincts tell you to do that and to just take a breather to recollect yourself, follow those instincts. Your body always gives you information about the next step that you need to take to really heal.
Yeah, I love picking up the common sort of things that my guests have mentioned, and one of the big ones is trusting your gut, and that's following your intuition. It's all the same sort of thing. So I love that you mentioned that, and it ties into like the quarter life crisis stuff again, of like, if you have this feeling or this intuition, like follow that. So I know you mentioned if you're experiencing trauma, like channel that and use that. And I think if people are in a situation at work or anything else, like if you're feeling overwhelmed and confused, like use that as a time for experimentation, and sort of getting clear on some answers. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then in the path of your bouncing back or your comeback, you studied a range of healing modalities. What did you find, or what were some of those that you studied, and what did you find the most helpful?
So for me, it started with nutrition. When I made the decision to live, and I really made that conscious decision, I was always like kind of in and out, like drinking a little too much and, getting myself into dangerous situations. And then at one point I was like, okay, Hannah, you have to stop this. Like, either you're going to live, but you don't just half-ass this thing. And when I really made the decision to get my shit together, the first thing I did was study nutrition and how the body heals from trauma. So I studied like what kinds of foods do the adrenals need and what food does even a body need to thrive, because at that time I didn't have a feeling for hunger after years of having had an eating disorder that basically just disappeared. So I loved studying about nutrition and just the body and its functions. That was so interesting to me. Then I enrolled in life coaching school. I studied NLP. I studied energy healing, spiritual healing, emotional healing, lots of psychology as well. So I am trained as a life coach, but I also have a passion for traditional psychology and really understanding shadow work and all that cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you I mean, that's really cool, and there's some that you mentioned there that I'm also really passionate about, especially the psychology, and I am looking at doing an NLP course very soon. But what do you have to say to people? I mean, there's a lot of criticism of like 20-something life coaches, and you're not. What do you know about coaching, or how can you call yourself a life coach at 20-something years old? What do you think about people who say that sort of thing?
Oh, that's such a good question. I get it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Usually not when people meet me in real life. But yeah, it's interesting. So it just makes me laugh because it doesn't get to me. Like, my work is so incredibly powerful and the results speak for themselves. And people come to me because they want it and because they need it. And there's never a doubt in my mind that I'm not good enough or that I don't have enough expertise or whatever. As long as it works for my clients and it gets them what, basically I promised them in the beginning of our coaching relationship, that's basically all the proof that I need that I am good where I'm at. Like, this is meant for me. This is the perfect job. And what many people might not understand is that life coaches don't coach from expertise. Like,
Yes.
many of my clients are doing things I've never done before. I've never built a juice company. I've never had a divorce. I've never had a baby. I've never painted a painting. I've never had their life experiences. And so I don't teach from my own experiences, but life coaching is really something, it's a studied profession. If you're a surgeon, you can perform surgeries on people even though you might not have had cancer yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love
So
that. I
it
love
is.
that example.
Yeah, it's so funny because we're not just sitting around and telling people what to do. Life coaching is really something that you have to study. And then the more that you master this craft, then you can just basically help anybody, because the same patterns, and maybe you feel the same way. For me, the same patterns show up in every single person I talk to, whether they're a client or, somebody who just follows my work or a friend or a family member. It's always the same pattern. It's just that my business has a very specific message because I'm on a very specific mission.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it works for every person.
Yeah, I love that I love that we spoke about this and what you had to say. And I think two things from my side, because I'm also doing this sort of work. I think I'm a couple of years older than you, but I'm still in my 20s, which some people will still argue is too young to be coaching. But to me, there's two things. The first is like your unique journey and your unique path. And the path that you've taken means that you are able to help people a few steps behind you on the same path. It doesn't matter how old you are. But the other thing is, like you said, coaching is like a set of tools and techniques to help people get results. It's not like mentorship where you've gone through something and now you advise people what they should do in the same situation. It's not like that at all. And I think that's probably where the confusion comes in, is people confuse mentorship and coaching. But they are completely different. So yeah, I'm really glad you touched on that too. You mentioned spiritual healing earlier, and I know in this episode I want to speak about sort of spirituality. So why don't we just start there? And what does it mean to you to be spiritual?
So I would love to first define the divine or God, because I feel like that would be necessary to understand what I mean when I say spirituality. So for me, the divine or God or spirit, I like to call this force God, is it's this mysterious thing that makes the clouds move across the sky. It's this thing that causes plants to thrive. It's this magic, however you want to call it, that causes the cells of my body to regenerate, and that my body is mysteriously just growing stuff. Like I don't wake up in the morning and I say, "Oh, let's grow a liver today." No, like I'm being grown, I'm being lived, I'm being breathed, even though I'm not always conscious. Like it functions anyway. Just like you could throw as many bombs as you want to at a forest, and it is going to thrive. It might take of thousands of years to do that, but we're always being grown and we're always thriving and we're always growing healthier and more fulfilled, even though it might not look like this in the short term. Um, and so that's kind of what God is for me. It's this underlying magic. It's the thing that created atoms and all these incredible things. And so a couple of years ago, I read a quote by Albert Einstein, and he says that his definition of God is the sum of all laws of nature, whether it's, those are laws that humans already know or laws that govern the world that we don't know of yet. And I so connect with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, being spiritual and living a soul-aligned life is about living in tune with those laws, being conscious of them and not struggling against them,
Mm-hmm.
but living in the flow.
Yeah, I like to call it universe. That's my sort of name for it. And to me, like, I've never identified as being a religious person, but I would say in recent years I've become a spiritual person. And to me, that means believing that there's sort of a bigger force at play here. It's not just us calling shots and making things happen on Earth. I think there's like something bigger at play. And to me, that's I call that the universe. And to me, that's being spiritual, is accepting that we're not in total control. And it's like you said, like you don't wake up saying like, I need to breathe or I need my hair and my nails to grow. So yeah, and then if that is what spirit is for you, what does your spiritual or mindfulness practice look like?
So I consider myself a priestess of the divine feminine. And
so what does that mean for people listening?
Okay, so being a priestess to me means that I live in service to the divine, meaning that what Hanna wants isn't the way. What the divine wants is what's going to happen. So I really live in service and in surrender to the divine. And I also live in surrender to the greater good. So everything that I do serves the greater good. I serve myself, I serve the world. And I basically live in a state of prayer these days. I get up and I pray. I go to bed and I pray. Throughout the day, I pray. I surrender a lot to the divine because I realize that I'm really out of control. The world seems out of control because it is. And having that realization just completely relieved me, because now I can just pray and say, I don't know how to deal with this situation. Yesterday I had some weird tech problems in my business, which is always really stressful, and I can just surrender that. I can just say, you take over. I'm not going to struggle anymore, and I'm not going to try and force my way anymore. Couldn't possibly know what's supposed to happen. You take over. You show the way, and I'll follow. Mm-hmm. So that's being a priestess. For me, it means being conscious of serving the greater good.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. And what would if you don't mind sharing, like what would a typical prayer look or sound like?
So my favorite prayer is thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it with the understanding that I couldn't possibly know what's good for me. Like I can't know what's supposed to happen, so I don't fight with reality. And whatever happens is here because I need it. And whenever something challenging stays, it's because I am not done learning from it yet. So my favorite prayer is saying thank you. These days, I don't ask for a lot anymore. It's more that I say thank you. Mm-hmm. And I ask what I'm supposed to do, and then I receive visions. And yeah, saying thank you and you guide me, you take over. Thank you.
I love that. That's actually the first thing that I say when I wake up in the morning before I've even got out of bed. I just keep my eyes closed after I've woken up and just say thank you. Again, I think we're two soul siblings speaking on the call. Something that popped into my mind now while you were speaking is, you said you don't really ask for much, but is there a point where we kind of distinguish between just accepting things as they are versus like fighting for what we want?
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is a good one. Because people do see me get a lot of shit done, and then sometimes they don't believe that I really live in this state of surrender, because they think, well, if you just give everything up to the divine, aren't you just going to sit around and, smile saintly but not really do anything? So my personal process is that I don't create plans or visions or goals for myself. I receive those. So I sit down in meditation and I ask, how am I meant to live? How am I meant to serve? How can I use my gifts in the best way? Sometimes words come up. Sometimes I get visions. I have a very clear vision of where I'm going to be 20 years from now, 5 years from now. And none of these were visions that I dreamed up. All of these were visions that I received in a meditative state. So I received those visions, and that's basically my soul assignment. That's my soul path. And then I know that God and I made a plan before I got here. This is the plan. So let's have some fun. Let's create this. Like, how much action can I take? Like, how fun can I make this action? How can I make it as easy as possible? How can I make it as joyful as possible? How can I touch as many hearts as I can while creating this? I run a podcast as well that takes a lot of time and effort, as you know. So you do have to take a lot of action. But when I see in my vision, Hanna has a podcast, that's non-negotiable. And I'll put whatever I can towards doing that. And then that is also kind of a spiritual practice, because this is how I am being asked to serve.
Yeah, I love that distinction of like not setting goals and like forcing things to happen, but receiving. How do you put yourself in that meditative state to get these visions?
So the first thing that I do is I surrender everything. And I like to list all the things that I could potentially hold on to. So I say, I surrender my living situation. And basically that means I give it up to you. If you want me to live somewhere else and have my landlord evict me tomorrow, I'm okay with that. You guide where I should live. And then I say, I surrender all of my relationships, my relationship with my boyfriend, relationship with my parents, my relationship with all of my friends, with myself, surrender all of my finances. I surrender everything to you. And basically I go through every single area of my life, and then I say, you think through me. Please, I open up to you. You feel through me. You express yourself through me. You act through me. And then when I've surrendered everything and I've invited the divine to express itself or herself or himself through me, I ask these questions. How am I meant to live? And then sometimes it just takes some time, like especially when you're doing it in the beginning, you might sit for a while, or you might want to journal, or you might feel that your mind is becoming busy again. And what helps is returning to this surrender process, to this process of, I don't care. Like, whatever you want is what I want. And that usually helps me get into that state pretty quickly.
Cool. Got it. I love that. Hanna, you faced obvious trauma growing up, but what is it that makes some people thrive and come back from that trauma and live their life to the fullest, while others kind of crumble beneath the weight of it all?
That's a good question. I've asked myself that. Part of me doesn't know. Part of me does not know, because many people who've had the experiences that I've had aren't alive anymore. They were successful in ending their lives, and they might be hooked to drugs. I know some people who have had similar experiences and aren't doing well at all. So I kept wondering, like, why me? Like, how come I live like this and other people don't. I think there are some practical things that maybe I've done that other people haven't. But to be completely honest, I don't know. All I know is that I was guided here and I'm here now and I'm being called to serve. And everybody else who didn't make it, I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. So how then do we go about discovering the work that we're meant to create in the world?
One of my favorite tools is what I talked about earlier. It's the question, how am I meant to serve? What's also incredibly helpful is to have a coach or somebody you know really, really well reflect back to you what they come to you for. So a question that I love to ask my clients or my friends a lot is, what do people ask you for all the time? What do you enjoy doing and you wouldn't even call it work? Like, what's so effortless that you would never even consider it being work, but that really people want from you all the time. So for me, people kept asking me questions about life, like deep, deep stuff, no matter their age or their profession. People always came to me for that. And so oftentimes our life's work is so obvious to people outside of ourselves, but so hidden from our own perspective because we're engaged in it all the time. We're doing it all the time. So I would say ask the question, how am I meant to serve? How am I meant to live? Sit in a meditative state and really let that answer come. And also have other people reflect back to you. What they feel you do that brings the most value to them.
I love that. Hanna, I do want to be mindful of the time. Before we wrap up, I've got a couple of questions at the end here. The first one is, you're still pretty young, but what do you wish you'd been told earlier in your 20s?
Earlier in my 20s, so many things. Comparing has been a huge, and sometimes still is, a big, big, big stumbling stone for me. And, we hear it all the time, like, don't compare yourself. You're awesome the way you are, da 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 da. But I wish somebody had taken me aside and just been like, really, Hanna, like, that's not just talk. Really, like, shut off your computer, log out of Instagram, stop looking at what other people are doing. You don't know the whole story, and listen within or tune into what you want. And there's your soul path, which is the path that is going to be most fulfilling to you. And so stop comparing. And I wish they would have told me that in a way that I could understand. But I probably heard it and I just didn't listen. But yeah.
I got it. What is the greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today?
The greatest opportunity is being able to make so many mistakes and being able to rise from the ashes so easily. Like, we can't really crash and burn so easily anymore. So it's nice that we can just try some things and have some really good fuck ups. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was listening to a Gary Vee, watching a Gary Vee video yesterday, and he was speaking to a 25-year-old guy, and he said, you can get everything wrong for the next 7 years and finally figure it all out and still only be 32 years old, which is pretty cool. Cool. Hanna, I do have one more question. Before I get to that, is there anything else you think might be valuable for people to take away from this conversation?
I feel like we've come full circle.
Yeah. Where can people go to find out more about you and all the work that you're up to?
Yes, my website is called hannabier.com. This is HANNABIER.com. And I also love receiving email. I always try and respond to everything on time. So you can just email me at hanna@freespirited.co.
Cool. I'll link up all of that in the show notes. And in terms of social media, where do you most hang out?
So my favorite is Pinterest, but the only social media platform where I'm active-ish is Instagram. And my handle is @HannaFreeSpirited.
Got it. Cool. Hanna, before I get on to the final question, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you for coming on the show today and sharing so openly and vulnerably your story. I think it's really powerful how you hit maybe not rock bottom as we discussed earlier, but got to some really low points and had a really tough upbringing, but have turned that into really powerful work that you're doing with other people and helping them on their own journey. And I just want to acknowledge you for showing up and doing the work that you were put here to do. The final question that I do have is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
I would love for you guys to either sit down with a piece of paper or just sit down in a meditative state, whatever comes easiest to you, and to release all expectation and really ask yourself those questions like, how am I meant to live? How am I meant to serve? And to just see what comes up.
I love it. Hanna Bier, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thank you, Brian.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 53 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. Big thanks once again to Hanna for coming on the show and sharing so openly and vulnerably about her story and also how she's transformed that into doing the work she's doing now. I really enjoyed this one, something a little different from our other content. And if you enjoyed it too, please share it around on social media with your friends and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier. Let me know what your biggest takeaways were. For me, it was the really actionable step that Hanna gave for this week, and that was sit silently whether you're journaling or not, and just ask yourself, how am I meant to serve? What am I here to do? And notice what comes up for you. It's really powerful, really cool. In other news, if you're following me on Instagram, specifically on my Instagram stories, you'll see that I'm doing the minimalism game this month, and you can read all about that at briantier.com/minimalismgame, or just head over to the site and you should be able to find it pretty easily. So I'd love for you to join me. Whenever you're listening to this, you can start on your own day one if you want, but have a look at the minimalism game and tweet me again at briantier. Let me know you're taking part. Now, as always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in the show at briantier.com/053. Thanks once again for joining me, and until next time, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.